y continuamos con nuestra primera conferencia del día de hoy. Esta está a cargo del ingeniero Torsten Müller de Fraunhofer, Alemania, y nos presenta la conferencia titulada Recomendaciones de políticas para la gestión de los residuos. El doctor Darwin, mi compañero de trabajo, me acompaña para leer y conocer un poco más del ingeniero Torsten Müller.
Hola nuevamente. La Fundación Fraunhofer es socio del proyecto. Y como yo he dicho en algunos contextos, es el segundo poder de Alemania. Tienen más de 25.000 empleados. Es una fundación bastante activa y que impacta de manera directa a muchos aspectos de lo que es la investigación aplicada y la investigación básica. En este caso, el representante dentro del proyecto es el ingeniero Torsten Müller, que nos acompaña aquí delante. Él tiene un título de Ingeniería en Gestión de Residuos y Tratamiento de Sitios Contaminados de la Universidad Técnica de Dresde. Desde el 2010 trabaja como científico y gerente de proyectos en la Fundación Fraunhofer, en el grupo de reciclaje y eficiencia de recursos. Está a cargo de proyectos financiados a nivel nacional e internacional, así como proyectos bilaterales con la industria. Su principal área de trabajo es el desarrollo de estrategias de reciclaje y sustitución de flujos de residuos domésticos e industriales y la definición de cascada de materiales para un uso más eficiente de las materias primas. Él nos va a hablar ahora en la mañana un poco del marco legal y del marco regulatorio para estos temas, así que nos complace bastante tener a Torsten Müller en medio nuestro. Gracias.
Buenos días a todos. The presentation is, my Spanish is not good enough to do the presentation in Spanish, so I will try to do it properly in English. Yes, so we heard yesterday the very enthusiastic thank you very much. Thank you, Darlene, first of all. We heard yesterday the very enthusiastic presentation of the Guatemalan ambassador here. And he showed us more or less how they fight the symptoms of the disease waste. Today I'm going to present you more or less what we would recommend to go a little beyond what they are currently doing. So unfortunately he's not here today, but we will hopefully somehow manage to send them the presentation and they will get a written document which has been mainly prepared by the colleagues from Guatemala, which unfortunately cannot be here today, and the colleagues from Poland, and we contributed as well. So in case of questions, feel free to approach me in the breaks. This is the list of topics I'm going to present today. I think that's the old presentation. Let me just jump to the next slide. Guatemala, even though I'm talking now about Guatemala and the recommendations are mainly for Guatemala, doesn't mean they're not valid for the Dominican Republic. What happens in Guatemala right now is that you have more or less 65% of organic material in the waste stream. Anyway, most of the waste is burned by the people, mainly in rural areas. There is no proper collection. People take it to their backyard and burn it. What we saw 2017 in Guatemala when we visited there was a landfill. It's this one actually, and you could see quite nicely how the material is delivered and how waste pickers jump between the trucks to take out valuable materials. Unfortunately, even though there is a law in Guatemala that describes how waste is handled, there is no real detailed explanation on how to execute it and how to properly do the treatment of the waste, respectively, not even how to properly handle and protect and treat the landfills. So what can you do to get to the point to really know how to execute, not only to say, okay, we want to have this, we want to have that. The next step is to really define, to know what you're talking about, first of all, and second of all, you need to really define what are your targets you're aiming to. So first of all, you need to know what is the territory you're talking about, where you, for example, want to put your landfill. Because you see in the picture, the water down there, nobody wants that in his rivers. So of course you need to have a certain idea in what environment you put a landfill or waste treatment facility, which socio-cultural situation you bring this, how much waste you're dealing with, and what is the composition. Then you need, of course, to identify what are the problems you're dealing with in this area. What is the objective you want to achieve? Do you want to just have a place where you want to put it, or do you really want to reuse materials? Then you have to adjust as well the collection accordingly. You have to plan measures, plan actions and measures accordingly, and of course you have to define in your plan or in your law clear responsibilities amongst the different stakeholders. Not only what the citizen has to do, but you have to define as well what the collectors, what the treatment facilities or companies have to do, but as well what is the role of the authorities and how can they maybe penalize and control all the system, all the processes. So as I mentioned, the first step towards defining such an executive program or a plan, or waste management plan as we call it in Europe, is to know what waste sources do you have, where does the waste occur, how much of it does occur, what different waste streams do I have, and maybe even how do I collect the different waste streams, or do I collect them together and separate them later? What waste management facilities do I have? Who is responsible? Take care, you need to define what is the economy, who pays for the treatment of that, how is it financed, and of course you have to have as well certain incentive programs. What you can see in the picture is the federal state of Baden-Württemberg where I live, and this is actually from the waste management plan we have. All the arrows and the small black dots you see are different waste management facilities, and it's clearly defined where the waste is collected, what stream is collected, and where do you take it to treat it. So, talking about the collection, of course, our recommendation is to standardize this process, not just to drive through the roads and someone collects this and someone collects that, but there's no real contractual base and no legal base to do that, but it's more that, for example, informal people collect it somewhere where they know, okay, there is material available. So you need to define whether you want to collect it from home, you have to separate it at home, or you want to collect it completely and you want to treat it and separate it in a facility. You have to define the frequency, which is more or less based on the environmental conditions you have. You cannot just collect organic waste every second week. That might be quite smelly. You need to be clear about the amounts, and that's all going into the definition how frequently you collect everything. Take advantage of the knowledge of the informal sector. The people that collect valuable materials from waste streams, they know exactly what they search for. They know exactly what they're dealing with. Why not taking advantage of them, of their knowledge, but bring them to a place where they can do exactly that, but in a more health sound environment, like in a facility with a proper personal protection, like you can see it in the picture. Use IT to better plan the routes of the trucks, better plan the schedules, maybe even avoid traffic jams if you know where the traffic jam occurs in a certain time. And of course, you need frequently to evaluate the costs of all the collection. The treatment is as well very important because, of course, that's the basis of how you can maybe earn a certain benefit from the materials you separate. Therefore, in a proper legal framework, you have to define recovery rates. The coverage for specific waste streams, how much do you want to collect separately of that? Anyway, you need to have a quality control and a monitoring system because any rule is helpful if you don't control if people follow it. Therefore, you need a certain communication between the authorities, between the operators of the facilities, but as well all other affected parties, including the public. And I said you have to control and you have to monitor. Of course, you need the administrative capacity to do that. And of course, you need to somehow have a standard included that describes how a reconsideration of permits for treatment and collection companies can be done. So maybe you have permission announced anew every third or second year. Talking about incentive programs, of course, somehow you need to finance all this effort you bring into to have a proper collection of different materials. You need either to raise taxes or put sanctions to companies or people that don't follow the way that is that you want them to follow. You can have a positive feedback by for people that reduce waste and or companies or people that especially use environmental friendly products to ensure that they maybe pay less taxes. For example, landfill taxes, or you give special rates for recycling, like you have this app that is in Europe running that collects which this company collects electronic equipment, and you get vouchers for certain shops and whatever if you bring your electronic equipment there. So they take care of the recycling, and you have a benefit because you have a nice voucher to go to the supermarket or whatever. You can have a deposit system on barely everything. We have that on actually the starter batteries for cars. We have that for plastic bottles and cans and glass bottles. And with a certain amount, people are happy to bring that back because they receive some certain money back. And of course, you have the option of an extended producer responsibility that, for example, in Europe, I talked about this more extensive last year, but we have in Europe that for different waste streams like batteries, like packaging, where the producers of these kind of products are included in the payment and the financing of the recycling system. Sorry. Talking about the national policy for waste management, of course, there are some things to be included as well. Of course, you have to have a national standard to ensure that the waste and the storage of the waste is in an environmental and health sound manner across the country, not just in one place. What means as well that you have to take care of landfills, for example. They need to be built in a proper way that not only emissions cannot, as we heard yesterday, mainly about methane. It's not only about the emissions that go in the air, but especially the emissions and leachates that come out from the landfill into water, into rivers. Nobody wants that in their river, especially because there are heavy metals in. We recommend to implement a waste stream focused policy. Not only say, okay, I have a mixed waste stream that I'm treating. It's important to notice that some of the materials that are in there have a value, and only have a value if you collect them separately. Like, for example, if you want to have a nice compost, or certain plastic fractions, or metals, and so on. What means that? you have less waste landfilled. You can have a higher quality of the materials, as I mentioned before, and of course, you can reduce the environmental impact, because if you landfill a dry fraction, the amount of leachate that will bring heavy metals out of the landfill will reduce. And you have to treat less. And very important, and from our understanding, the most important part is to define a proper education system for staff and students to ensure that those people are able to run a treatment facility in a proper way. And of course, again, there need to be a periodical modification and review of policies and curricula. You cannot put a law in force and curricula in force and just leave it there for 20 years without adjusting to changes. Talking about land planning is very important. I mentioned that that we need to take into account that a treatment facility, if it is a landfill or a separation plant or whatever, needs to be installed in a way that this installation is not harming the environment or the people around. Otherwise, it's just an accumulation and collection of hazardous material in a certain area. So, first of all, you need to ensure that the collection is safe and the treatment is safe. You need to have a certain barrier around your production facilities, or you have to collect emissions. You have to provide public consultation to the people that might live around these facilities to ensure that their problems are heard as well. And of course, you need to be open to discuss as well about the goals of your facilities and why it's put in a certain place. So as well, these facilities need to be periodically reviewed. What does that mean? In the end, you can improve the personal living conditions of the people, even though they are living close to this place. You can avoid that facilities are put in a poor, thank you, in a poor location, as I mentioned, I will mention later. And of course, it will improve the environmental conditions. And what do I mean with a poor environmental condition place or a poor place to put, for example, a landfill? Of course, you should avoid to put something like this in an area where you have protected groundwater reservoirs or river valleys or areas that get flooded frequently, or karst rocks where the leachate can be uncontrolled and released into the ground. Talking about the education, I mentioned it. It's very important to have an awareness amongst the people what we're talking about, and it's not just to drop a piece of paper in the road. It's about how to live with a certain material and to handle it at home, and that it might make sense to separate at home and not just have one box, even though it's easier to put everything in the same box. To ensure that the certain material and the resources we have are properly used. So it's important to understand the influence and the impact of a poor waste management, and based on that you can give as well to teachers and to workers a proper education and workshops to use them as training factors. But of course, for that as well, you need to apply resources, you need to have them, and you need to provide them to them to ensure that this can be done in a proper way and in a continuous way. Our conclusions in that. So, as I mentioned before, there is a policy available, but what is missing are executive regulations. And they need to be implemented. They need to be defined, they need to be implemented, and you need to define as well a control and penalty mechanism to ensure that people learn from their failures. You need to periodically update the policies. You need to implement land planning and to plan where the location, the best location for a certain treatment facility is, to avoid these health risks and environmental pollution. You need to use technologies and local resources, not only to buy heavy and expensive equipment from Europe or whatever, but use local knowledge, local resources to cover local problems. Maybe with support, external support, but focus on what you have in a local way, because otherwise these might even just consume the resources that better would be applied in another way. Put a large weight on education and knowledge creation amongst the public and in universities, in companies as well. And very important as well, implement incentives, and we saw some from yesterday already, implement incentives to encourage the participation of the public, of the people, of school children, whoever, that just can benefit us all. And that's what I thank you for listening. And in case you have any question, of course, feel free to contact me. I finished with a nice picture of our institute. And in case of any question, I'm there.